So welcome everyone to College of the Rockies. My name is Terri MacDonald. I'm the Regional Innovation Chair in Rural Economic Development at Selkirk College, and I also head up the Columbia Basin Rural Development Institute. And I'm pleased to have you all here today to undertake our day-long business retention expansion training workshop. I am not going to go into a whole bunch of slides on the Columbia Basin Rural Development Institute because I think I've got most of you covered. But the one slide that I want to put up is just to highlight that we are the only rural-based, college-placed rural development institute in the country. And our focus is on applied research and the provision of timely and relevant information to support informed decision-making in our beautiful corner of southeast British Columbia, the Columbia Basin boundary region. So today, I've really broken it down, and you have a training agenda in front of you that kind of gives you a little bit more of the specifics, but I just kind of wanted to give you the big chunks of what we're going to be covering today and sort of get you prepared for the morning is going to be pretty heavy on content, and the afternoon is going to be much more role play scenario, actually using the Executive Pulse tool. So we're really going to try to hammer through the content this morning and then actually do some applied work in the afternoon. So what we're going to start with is just really an introduction to business retention and expansion. What is it? There are different types of implementation models, so we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about the model that we are in the process, we're creating, but we're sort of constantly co-creating this model, this Made in the Kootenays model, based on the lessons learned from the communities that are doing the work. So we've got a bit of a unique regional model, so we'll talk a bit about that. And then we're going to talk about assessing readiness, and that's when I'm going to get you to use your clickers, which is fun. We'll take a break depending on how timing goes, and then we're going to go right into the pre-planning piece. And this is something, thank you to Diana Brooks for giving a heads up to the province of British Columbia on the work that we've been doing over the last year and a bit on business retention and expansion. They're really interested in our focus on pre-planning, and that's part of what we're doing today. So it's really thinking about what elements do you need to have in place before you go out and start talking to business. And I think what you'll realize today that there is quite a bit that you need to get in place before you move forward. So we're going to talk, that's a really big piece of the puzzle, and we're also going to talk a lot about, not a lot, because I don't want you to glaze over with boredom, but we're going to talk about research and about how to do good research and do it in a way that when you get the findings coming out of your business retention and expansion, you feel confident, you can trust those findings, they're valid, and you can use them for planning, and you've really got a good picture. Then we'll do lunch. It's going to depend on how quickly we go through this. And we're going to start looking at the Executive Pulse system, and I'll tell you a little bit about what that system is, how to use it, and that's why we have our devices here. There's a new 6.0 system that they've just released that allows us to actually enter data while we're doing the interview, which is, I think, going to save us quite a bit of time when we do our business retention expansion. And we're going to actually role play interviews and data entry, so we're going to divide up into teams of 2 and actually go through the survey and really get our hands dirty. And then we're going to talk about moving research to action. So this is the other key part that, we'll talk up here a little bit, but we're really going to focus down on Module 4 that you really shouldn't do a business retention and expansion project in your community if A, you don't have the resources and the commitment to follow through on action, both at an individual follow-up with business level, but also on a broader economic climate level. So using these brief findings to really connect to your economic development plan, refresh it, or use it as the foundation of your plan if you don't have one. So that commitment really needs to be there. And the other piece, and we'll talk about it throughout, is that BRE is not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing effort. And what they recommend is that you revisit this every 3 years. So you're really tending the garden, if you will, of the businesses in your community. So there's some key pieces with moving that research to action. I'll talk a bit about, I think I just have one slide about data analysis and reporting, because as we go through, you'll see that the RDI is actually picking up that piece of the puzzle for you. We're doing that analysis, we're doing that reporting. I have some reports here to show you in terms of what that looks like, and some other products that we're looking to output, and that's sort of new and evolving as we go, and get your feedback on that. We'll talk about short and long-term actions. We'll start with the communities that have already done business retention and expansion here in the Basin Boundary region. Still pretty new. Their reports were just relatively recently released, so we haven't seen a lot of examples of things that they've accomplished, but we can certainly tell you where they're at and where they're moving. And then I've pulled a number of examples from other communities, a number of communities in Ontario, Some other examples of communities that have really taken these findings and really moved them forward in a meaningful way so that you can see what does that look like? What might that look like in my community? And then we're going to break off, depending on time. We've got a lot to go through, but I'm going to try to go pretty fast, but not too fast. Some scenarios about small businesses that you may be talking to and a challenge that they might have, and break you into groups and have you start to brainstorm what might you do to meet the needs of that business, either to help them grow or help them not close or relocate. So does that sound like a pretty good jam-packed agenda? So in true learning fashion, I used to be a science teacher, so I am trained in the learning outcomes idea. I've just connected the modules with, at the end of this, and we have some evaluations that we want you to complete, but if we did our job right, and if I did my job right, you should have a good understanding of BRE and its major program elements. You should be ready to plan your own business retention and expansion program in your community, ready to roll after today. You should be ready to take a leadership role in BRE implementation with respect to being a member of the steering committee or going out and doing those interviews. And of course, using the executive pulse system, and then understand how to use those BRE results to support businesses in your community. Again, on that individual level, but on that broader economic climate level. Does that sound like a good? Okay, ready? All right, here we go. What is business retention and expansion? Really, quite simply, it's going out and talking to businesses in your community. And you would be surprised. I've had the first few communities that came forward said, we don't really know if businesses will want to talk to us. Well, resoundingly, that was actually the opposite. Businesses are very anxious to have someone listen, but they're also leery in terms of, are you actually going to do something with it? I don't want to give you an hour and a half of my time and not have a commitment from you and local government, the Chamber of Commerce, Community Futures, that nothing's going to be done here. So communicate with those business owners and make sure that you have that backing. You can feel confident that you're actually going to do something with this. You're really looking to gain insights related into the company and industry trends. So we're going to talk a bit later about looking at particular sectors, but you want to get a flavor of individual business needs and what's going on within industries in your community. And we've got different communities here today that may have different economic drivers happening within their communities. So we'll talk about what that might mean in terms of selecting businesses, which ones to talk to. You want to focus on identifying and responding to the needs and opportunities of individual businesses, as I'd said. So there may be some real challenges, but there might be some really great opportunities for actual businesses already in your community that you can help them through some of the challenges they're facing or realize the expansion dreams they have. And then the economic climate, as we mentioned, there will be things that are broader than what one business. You'll have a bunch of businesses sort of saying the same thing, and those are the cues for you to, let's refresh our economic development plan, or let's make sure we're addressing that within our plan and our short and long-term actions. And then the other piece is that, you know, business retention and expansion, it's a highly effective economic development approach, especially in rural areas. And I think my next slide will talk a little bit about, you know, attraction and retention and expansion. About a year and a bit ago, we had Mike Stolte do a bit of research for us, best practice research, looking at different models, and I've given you a spreadsheet of some of the different models that are out there, and it's absolutely, the folks that have done it and have made the commitment really do see return on their investment. And that's one of the things as an institute we're now trying to envision. How do we look at metrics? We're not there yet, but that is in sort of the forefront as we're entering into year 2 of this pilot. So they estimate between 40 and up to 90% of new jobs are created through existing businesses in your community. So that's, to me, seems like a real low-hanging fruit. The other key piece is that you want to build relationships with your businesses. In some cases, those businesses don't feel that anybody's really talking to them or cares what they're doing. So it's really building those relationships and those synergies. The other piece is you want to do that targeted support and the broader economic climate piece. And then there's research that you want to look at to support not only local, but regional economic development planning and action. And that's where, as a regional research institute, we're very, very interested in the communities that are moving forward, because we're already seeing some common threads across communities. And as we expand our business retention and expansion work across the entire region, it's been mainly focused in the West Kootenay, but we've had the technology and manufacturing regional piece. We're seeing some really interesting opportunities for us as economic development practitioners and those who are interested in supporting it what can we do collectively? We know that there are some things that are going to come out that are beyond the scope of your community. They're just big, and we need to look at collective action to move forward on some of those big issues. So what are the different business retention and implementation models that are out there? There's a lot. I want you to, sorry over here, I had to have you share some of your handouts. I think the two of you have to share this long one, and you guys too. But you have a spreadsheet here. And this is something that Mike Stolte had pulled together for us. He interviewed stakeholders from each of these initiatives to find out what their approach was. And it really varies. And it seems to me, I'm just going to go down to the bottom point here, that models seem to be really driven by the resourcing that's available to business retention and expansion programs. So if you were to go out and do a BRIE, and you're a community and you have, you bought into the BC Business Counts license, which would cost you $2,500, and you then realize that you need to hire a consultant to go out and do the interviews, and or you need someone to do the analysis or the report writing, that bill can go up. Some of the research coming out of Ontario was saying you should budget between $25,000 and $35,000 to do a good business retention and expansion project. The good news is we've got a fairly well-resourced program here in the Columbia Basin Boundary Region. You don't have to pay for the analysis. You don't have to pay for the report writing. That takes a big chunk. The other piece that we learned from the Nelson Initiative, which I think was 2010, they realized they needed to hire someone. And this is, I think, where, if you look at this, it talks about the Ontario model. This is where the Ontario model stuttered, and I believe is revisiting their approach. It was very volunteer-driven, and it just, right? How many of us are just done? We're trying to do so many things off the side of our desk, and we just can't do them well. And that was really what was happening under the Ontario model, that, and the advice from Nelson, hire someone. So they allocated $10,000 to hire somebody in their community to help with coordination and to help with the interviews. And I know if you spoke to Sandy Santori, who is the former Economic Development Officer of the Lower Columbia Initiatives, he'll tell you the same thing. He was overwhelmed about the amount of work. They had targeted a huge number of businesses, and when they got down to it, and what we've learned, and it may be different now that we can actually enter the data while we do the interview, but it's estimated 4 hours per business to do one of these BRIEs. And that is calling, making the appointment, driving there, sitting down, having the conversation. You'll find some businesses are going to want to talk for 2 hours. Then you have to do your data entry. So it can be up to 4 hours per business. And if you don't have that resourced, you're going to be struggling, and you're going to feel extremely frustrated. And you want to do a quality project. So in terms of the different models, there's lots of approaches to take. Business walks is something that's starting to really, seems like it's getting some good footing here in British Columbia. And that's really walking out to businesses, and correct me if I'm wrong here, because I've learned this from you, essentially. 3 questions, I think it's 3 questions, going out and getting a team. So getting a team of economic development practitioners and service providers, so chamber managers and board members, and one day, go out and go into those businesses and ask them those 3 questions. And that's a quick taking the pulse of what's going on in your community. Now, you should know that as part of our license that we'll go into later, there is a business walks component. So if you decide that's all you want to do, you want to do the 3 questions, that is an option for you within our current license. The benefit of that is you're doing your relationship building, and you're getting a real kind of a sense of what's going, a really quick sense of what's going on, and it's quick, fast, and you get a bunch of people involved. It's a little bit less data focused. You have some cues on who you might want to follow up with, but you don't have a whole bunch of information about what's going on within each individual business. So you're not taxing the business owner as much. You can also do sort of unstructured survey-driven interviews, and those can be done by a number of people. Maybe it's just the economic development officer or just the chamber manager. Maybe you hire consultants, service providers, or volunteers. Again, that's relationship building, but maybe a little bit less data focused. With an unstructured survey approach, you're having a conversation. You're not necessarily focusing on each piece of information to try to capture it in a standardized way. So that moves us to the structured survey-driven interviews, and that's kind of where we're falling right now with our regional model. And I should say, where we're at with the regional model, it's evolving. We're making it up really as we go. We have a regional advisory group, of which a rep from each of your communities is welcome to join. It's a pretty big, very engaged group that's done some great sharing of lessons learned. But we've also done that best practice research and some literature reviews, and I have a bit of literature over on the side for those who want to do some more reading. But that's sort of, we've looked at what else is out there and who we are, and have come up with sort of where we've landed today. And where I'm taking you today in terms of how to do these interviews is it's called structure interviews. And that means you're not ad-libbing, you're reading each question as it is written, and you're not paraphrasing, you're not leading. You may be asking for more information, but you're keeping it as a very sort of, I am a researcher and I'm gathering this data. I'm also building relationships with you, and we want to listen, but we really want a really tight process so that we can capture good data. So it's relationship building and it's data focused. So surveys can also be administered online and or by phone, and or focus groups can be used. So I know Nelson, they targeted 200, and they did a number they did a Survey Monkey, and I think the Cusp is also doing their breed. They set up a Survey Monkey as well, just to get some more data. So you can look at a kind of, it's called a multi-method approach if you want to get a higher number of participants. But again, the interviews are the best because you're actually sitting down with the business owner and building the relationship. Focus groups, they can be used just, instead of doing business retention and expansion, you can hire a facilitator and get some businesses together and ask them a series of questions, maybe similar to business walks. But other communities that have just finished their BRIE are thinking about bringing the business community together, presenting back out the results, and engaging them in some focus group kind of follow-up. Because what you'll find from the BRIE findings is you'll get cues of certain things, but you might want to learn more. What does that mean? And that may be a follow-up interview with the 12 businesses that said development approval was not working in your community, or it might be something broader in terms of bringing in a facilitator to do some more of that focus group stuff. And then again, models are driven by BRIE program resourcing, and as I mentioned, we have the resources of the RDI, but we also have the backing of Columbia Basin Trust, who is inviting communities that are interested in working with the RDI on their BRIE to approach their community liaison for funding to help offset the cost of that sort of body to pull it all together, which is great. So any questions about those different models? And certainly, we can talk more about it, and you've got your handout. There's a wide array. Some are very provincially funded and institutionalized. Others are very informal. So it's a wide gamut of where you fall. We're not as well-resourced as the Ontario model, for example. We sort of fall somewhere in between. So in terms of the RDI and why is the RDI involved with this, back when I started, I guess it's been 2 full years, I knew that there were a number of communities that were already talking about business retention and expansion, and a few that had already done their own BRIE programs. And folks were coming up with their own surveys and using different surveys. And I'd spoken to Diana Brooks about a program that's coming out of at a provincial level, and it's the BC Business Counts program. And I should note that Kevin Weaver's actually still a board member on the Economic Development Association of British Columbia, of which this BC Business Counts program is coming from. So I'm going to try to do my best to talk about it, but certainly I would invite you to have some more chats with Kevin, who can tell you more information on it. The idea is, I believe BC Hydro and the province of BC way back helped to purchase a provincial license. It's an online client management system where you can enter your BRIE data, but you can also do cross referrals and track referrals. So it's a very robust, sophisticated system that I think it's going to take us some time to really actualize how much it can do for us. But with that provincial purchasing of the license, communities were then able to buy in at a reduced cost. So the average cost for communities partnering up with EDABC was about $2,500. So looking around, and what could we do here in the Kootenays? Do we make up our own survey? We decided that the best approach would be to partner with EDABC and buy a regional license. So every community in the Columbia Basin Boundary Region has a license at your fingertips. All it is asking me to set up your password and your parameters, and off you go. So it's a great opportunity for us. I should note that the Columbia Basin Trust purchased that regional license. It was not inexpensive. You can imagine that number of communities times $2,500. And the Rural Development Institute now pays the annual fee for that license, which is 10% of the total. So we've taken on, Selkirk College now holds that license. And myself, I'm the administrator of the regional. So I can set people up with passwords and I can access your data. And hopefully fix anything that seems not to be working the best. So again, I invite you to chat with Kevin just even a little bit more about the history of how that all came about and the work that they're doing at the EDABC. I know there's some supports that are starting to come out, some manuals and things of that nature that are sort of on the horizon. So there's additional resources for us to use. So the other piece is that we knew when we were talking with communities in the beginning that people wanted something that was community driven. They didn't want a top-down, highly institutionalized, we're going to send some research from the Institute to go talk to your businesses. People wanted a grassroots up, community driven. They wanted something that was capacity inclusive. So basically what that means is we have a number of communities in this region that don't have an economic development function at all. They don't even have a chamber manager that's paid. So we've got really varying capacity in our communities, and these communities are feeling left out sometimes, and they want to be involved. So there was a real attention to making this accessible to those who have high capacity and those who have limited capacity. And if you're going to ask me how to define economic development capacity, we are working on a literature review and something called a knowledge synthesis, which is a short 5 to 10 pager that's super easy to understand, not in academic language, that talks about economic development capacity and community capacity, just to frame it in a way that we're all speaking the same language. But for the purpose of today, I'm going to keep it really simple. Does your community have an up-to-date economic development plan? Does your community have somebody working on economic development? Those are very simplified, so we know we've got a real range in our region. And we also noticed in the first few meetings of that regional advisory group, boy, people were really interested in a regional partnership framework. They wanted to be able to pick up the phone and say, okay, I'm starting my project now. What letter did you use? What did you use to send out to businesses? How much information did you give them? So there's been some really great synergy, and you'll now be part of that network of people who have gone down the road before and stumbled and got back up and have some really good advice for you and can help you as you have questions. Process support was needed to communities based on best practices. So we knew Lower Columbia was ready to roll on their business retention and expansion, but they weren't sure of what it would even take. So that's part of what we're doing today around the training and the manual that we've pulled together that you've got in front of you, is giving you the tools you need to do a good job. Just to clarify, the Columbia Basin Rural Development Institute is a research body. We're not an economic development organization or consultancy group. We're here to give you the tools you need to build your own capacity to do your own good work in your communities. So that's the part that we're doing here today, well, one piece anyway. The research support, we talked about this idea of offsetting implementation costs and making it accessible to communities, and then tying to that provincial efforts around the regional license and the EDABC. The other piece that we're excited about is we're already starting to get requests for information. Now, it's great that the Institute sits at a post-secondary because we're bound to post-secondary ethics standards. So don't be afraid. I'm not going to share information about any individual business so that they can be identified, and we'll go through that later today. But we can pull together reports, regional or sub-regional level reports on specific areas. So one example of what we were able to do, we had about 336 businesses in the database at the point when the regional skills workforce table was coming together to look at a regional skills training plan with the colleges and a number of partners. Some of you may have participated in the sessions. Well, they were really struggling, like our institute, to get good local level, regional level data on businesses. It's just the census has gutted much of what they used to give us. We are purchasing some labor force survey data at a regional level, but we just don't have it in our rural areas. So what we were able to do is pull together the data and create a report on workforce in our region based on the interviews with those 336 businesses. So it's interesting that we're now kind of at that point where we can pull together some of these specific topics and start looking at issues on a regional level. And then in terms of research and development activities, I'd already covered this. We did some research and we pulled together an advisory, and we are co-creating this as we go. And so we're learning from one another with each new community. the lessons continue to come out in terms of what works, what doesn't work. How is this working in smaller communities? We have NACUSP and Slocan Valley both doing business retention and expansion right now, and they're lower level capacity communities. So we're learning a lot in terms of what support they need to move forward with their program and be responsive to the needs of businesses. And then in terms of development and refinement, we've pulled together training materials. You have the manual, the workshop. We've created a framework and some tools and processes. We've created an analytic and reporting framework. So some of you may at break want to take a look at our BRE reports in terms of what they look like and what we've got in terms of an executive summary and recommendations. And then right now we're starting to talk about metrics. So we've done some research around how have others measured the success of their BRE, and I know the new 6.0 system actually has a metrics survey in the system, and that's something that I think as we start getting our feet wet and building our capacity, that's something that we want to be looking at. And then in-kind research, as we'd mentioned. So in terms of, we talked about our model, which is fairly structured. It's research structured, but still wanting to build relationship. We're implementing a rigorous research protocol. We really want to make sure that we've got trust and confidence in the results. We are moving forward with that collaborative model and really promoting sharing of lessons learned and cross referrals. So this is the light bulb or the I don't know, the hair on my arms maybe stood up at the recent Economic Development Association of BC conference. There was a session on BRE, and there was a presenter out of, were you there? Out of maybe Vancouver Island. It was a best practice model, and they had done at that point 500 surveys. So they were well into it, and he said that they had a 95% closure of referrals. So the system does allow for action items, so that you can email people to do action items. They had a 95% close the loop, and that's something we have not yet done. We haven't been tracking or making sure that we're closing the loop. And actually, quite frankly, we haven't had our partners yet really use the cross-referral mechanism within the system. So we're going to spend a bit of time on that today and talk a bit about how might we start looking at tracking how we're closing the loop on these action items. Hey, here's a business looking, they're wanting to expand, but they're struggling with financing. Referral to Sean. Sean, alert goes to him, there's a timing function, and we're able to find out if he's able to close that or cross-refer to somebody else. So that's something we're not there yet, but it is key on follow-up. So I'm hoping in this second year of our pilot, we're able to really focus on that. And then I'd mention as well this idea of an evolving model, and it's based on ongoing feedback. We've got communities that have just finished that are now trying to mobilize results, so we're learning a lot from those sort of, I call them our guinea pigs, to help us so that we're in a better position. When we did this training, it was back, our first time we did this training was back in February of 2012, and communities were rolling already, and we didn't have a manual. We were really just trying to pull things together, and we've come a long way, so it's a good time for you to be joining the pilot. Figured a few things out along the road. So what's happened, what is our progress to date? So it's a 3-year pilot. It officially started in January 2012. Communities started moving forward with data collection sort of in the spring of that year, and so we're about a year and a half kind of into it. Data collection was complete with the 4 first pilots being Boundary, Lower Columbia. The Innovation Councils did the manufacturing and technology sector specific on a regional level, and then NACUSP just finished their surveys. They finished inputting. So we now have 472 businesses surveyed to date, and that includes 59 from the Boundary, 147 from Lower Columbia, 82 from the manufacturing, and 97 from the technology regional. So you will have some likely in your database when you log in, you'll have surveys completed from businesses because the Innovation Councils did some of those manufacturing and technology ones for you. And NACUSP just finished their 46 businesses. We've delivered, this is going to change now, this will be our 3rd time on a workshop delivery pilot, and hopefully now based on how we do, I can hand it off to somebody else on my team to start doing the follow-up training. And then we're looking at supporting 5 pilots this year. As I'd mentioned, NACUSP and Slocan Valley are concluding data collection, and as I understand, Kimberley, Sparwood, and Golden are all interested in moving forward in this year. There are other communities that are interested, but I'm just sort of saying, let's hold off to next year. Let's get through this next round of pilots. We released the reports in May of 2013, and as I mentioned, groups are looking at maybe doing some focus groups to get the findings out and to start validating the findings and learning more. So that's something you don't have to do, but you may want to think about it. I think it's a good way to get out there and continue the conversation with businesses. Okay, we're close to clickers. We're doing pretty good. How does everybody feel? Are you following me? Because that was a lot. Normally that would have taken me an hour. It took me about a half an hour. Okay, so I'm getting better. Okay, so this really was stolen, but with permission, from the Government of Ontario. And some of the resources that you see in your manual have been taken and repurposed or revised from the Ontario manual, and work coming out of, I believe it's the University of Minnesota, who have been involved in BRIE for a really long time. So this is not new what we've created for you. This is just tweaked based on what was already out there, and we have received permission from both the Government of Ontario and the University of Minnesota to borrow and use these materials as we will. In the Ontario model, which you can find online if you Government of Ontario BRIE, they have a manual and they have, I believe, a 20-item checklist on BRIE readiness. So we've adopted. The general flavor is, do you have a core group with this idea of a steering committee that will commit the time to champion local implementation? And I say that it has to, I strongly urge that it's a local partnership approach, that you need to have local government, your Chamber of Commerce, your Community Future group, and any economic development body in your community all sitting together at the steering committee table, agreeing that you commit, and that message goes out to businesses at the very beginning of this process, that you're working together and your intent is to really follow through in a meaningful way. The other piece is, do you have an established volunteer base with the ability, willingness, and time to be active participants in the program, in the process? So when you bring these steering committee folks together, you're not paying them. So note, are your people taxed, or can you bring people together? And I'm not talking a meeting every week. I'm talking maybe 4 meetings over the course of, if you have a 6-month project, just at key milestones. Do you have the financial resources that you need to carry out a BRIE? So you need to pony up some dollars from your own community to match with the CBT? And are we committed to follow up and on recommendations and links to planning? So those are 2 pieces, the follow-up with businesses and the links to planning, that I'm so excited to see how this actually evolves over time. Okay, clicker time. Grab your clickers. So basically you're going to select 1, 2, or 3. You only get to select once. And you can start selecting anytime. My question is there active support of economic development activities from a range of community organizations? So do you have a range of groups that are interested or involved somehow in economic development? And you can just point it. I don't think it's an audit. It can be an auditorium. I could use this. So you could point it wherever you want. Okay. So there's 12 people. So there's 12 people. Everybody did it.
If the light comes on, that means it worked. Right?
Yeah. And I have my poll responses up here, so I know all 12 of us did it. So yes, that's great. Excellent.
Who
so
said no? Who said someone?
That's why it's anonymous. So does the community have an overall vision of what it wants to be like in its future? This is a tough one. I'm from the Slocan Valley. I don't know if anybody knows the Slocan Valley, but we've got a few different visions out there about where we should be going. Okay. Somewhat. Not surprising. This is not an easy place for a community to be. Activities like this are a way to help you start to get there, but that's okay. Is economic development activity in the community well organized and managed? Okay. Somewhat. So I think we've got some room for improvement. That's good. Have there been successful community projects that involve groups coming together for a common goal? So that's kind of more of a CED kind of idea, right? Like a community economic development. Any sort of project, have you seen a cross-section of groups that maybe would have been siloed coming together to do the work? Yes, very good. We're working together. And does your community have economic development relationships with other communities and development institutions? I'm reading this whole series of literature on social network analysis. I don't know if anybody's heard that, but part of the analysis is not only are you working well together within your community and within your region, but are you working well with others from outside of your region? So those other relationships are as important as well. Okay, one more vote. Everybody put their vote in again.
He wants to go again?
Yeah, because whoever's didn't go, it'll go. Or maybe somebody doesn't want to go. There you go. Okay, great. That's excellent. So that's kind of our movement towards a regional collaboration climate. Is the general quality of relationships among people and organizations in the community healthy? I love these subjective. Oh, okay. 50-50. So I'm sort of, you know, I'm forever the optimist, and I like to frame things in a positive way. There's an opportunity here. So there people in the community who are visionaries, action-oriented, and could serve on a BRE steering committee? Great, great. So we're not all burnt out? Is there a person in the community that could take a lead role and provide ongoing support in the project? So each community that participates, there's a BRE lead. There's somebody that leads it, that liaises with myself or members of our team. Great, okay. And final question. Does your community have an up-to-date economic development plan? And I'm going to let you define what up-to-date means. So do you have a plan and is it up to date? It's kind of two things in one. Very good, very good. Some no. So you can see what you're going to be able to do here with the BRE results. You can refresh, update, or in some cases you're actually going to use it as the foundation. I know for the case of the Slocan Valley, for example, their Economic Development Commission was not really sure of where they were and where they wanted to go. So they're really looking at this as a key piece on re-envisioning the future of economic development in the Valley, but also the future of that Economic Development Commission. So that's another interesting piece. So in this section, we're going to talk about pre-planning, and there's quite a bit to get through, but I've tried to keep it pretty concise and to the point. How was my timing this morning? It was pretty good? Not too fast, not too slow? Okay, good. So roles and responsibilities, this just sort of gives you a bit of a snapshot. I don't know if this is the best way to represent, but I just wanted to give you a sense of who's involved. So as I mentioned, we have a BRE regional advisory group that really is, I love advisory groups because I just go to them with all these questions and discussion, and from there we're able to go to the next level. And we just had a brief chat about advisory group needs to get back together again now because we're looking at completing a series of communities and moving forward with the next. So where are we at, where do we want to go, and how do we support? The Rural Development Institute, as you know, just trying to provide that support, research, and best practice tools. And then for each community that's moving forward, we ask that a local steering committee comes together to help organize the BRE project and thinks about the project from the beginning to there is no end, okay? And then one person in your community will be appointed as your local BRE lead. That person will then get an account set up within Executive Pulse, and that person can then set up other users within the system. So if there's a BRE lead person, I can set that up for you, and then you can actually manage your own part within your community of that system. And then I have the BRE researcher / coordinator. Communities have taken different approaches. Some have used an EDO, an assistant, and a chamber manager. Others have used the chamber manager and hired 2 retired accountants. Others have hired folks that work within their own organization. So there are different models. I know Nelson actually just hired somebody that worked at Community Futures to take this on as a coordinator, but she did the bulk of the interviews. So I would say access some funding and hire someone to help you with the logistics and with the interviews. The key point moving forward when you're thinking about who you're going to get to do the interviews, students are great, but you really do want to hire somebody that has a good understanding of business and has a level of credibility and can speak to these businesses in an intelligent way. I think that's very, very, it's the face of your project, and you want to make sure that you have someone there that should be there. So in terms of roles and responsibilities, I've really, I think, covered all of this. We'll help you with your research and your reporting and help you, support you along the way. And what we do, we like to connect you too. So communities that are interested have been asking who else has done it, and the partners who have already undertaken are open to sharing and open to a call. So I've been just kind of connecting. And then the local steering committee, as I mentioned, is really helping with the planning and the strategy, acquiring necessary resources, so making sure you've got the human and financial. I know in the past, Breeze, the Chamber of Commerce have really stepped up around just admin support and office space and things of in-kind things of that nature. Public relations and communications, there's a whole section in your manual. We have a sample introduction letter to businesses, a follow-up letter, communications strategy that you can complete. So we've got, I think, templates that you can hopefully easily just plug and play, but you need to be able to think about it. And it's good when the steering committee comes together and puts the brains together so you can think about, make sure that you're not missing any people or ways to communicate. Interviews with businesses, in some cases, members of the local steering committee will go out and do it. I know in Nelson, they had a few members of the Nelson and Area Economic Development Partnership that did 10 interviews here, and one would do 10 interviews there. So it's, you decide on how you want to do the relationship building piece, but you need to make sure that anybody that goes out to speak to a business gets the full background and protocol before they go out, because there's a lot to make sure that you're covering, especially around confidentiality and consent, and how to do good interviews. And then, of course, the local steering committee gets the results and has to mobilize these in some way in terms of linking them to planning, and maybe it's the steering committee itself that does it, maybe the steering committee opens it up, but the steering committee is the one that drives it and guides it. Okay, in terms of roles and responsibilities around the local BRE lead, as I mentioned, is responsible for the protection of data and management in the ePulse license. So there are different user levels, and we'll talk about that when we go into the ePulse system, but the BRE lead has full access to all the data, which means company level information and all of the responses. So in researcher terms, that's a raw data set that you don't want out there. So in research terms, whenever you have a raw data set, you immediately take the personal information, put it in another spreadsheet, and number the participants, and then you take your data spreadsheet and you put numbers and you replace the companies, and you protect the spreadsheet that has the names of the individual businesses. So in ethics standards, they go through all, and I'm following ethics standards here because I know it's overkill, but you never keep the two pieces. So even if you're doing a print survey and you have a cover page with the company's information and then you have the survey, you have to take that off right away, number it, right? So you number the thing and then you number the survey, and you have to put it in a locked cabinet, and it has to be destroyed in 7 years' time max. So just so that you know, that's data protection. You never have the company information in the same place as the data. It is there within the ePulse system, but the administrator of the BRE lead is the only one that sees that. Okay, so interviews with businesses, the BRE lead might be doing, following up on green flags and red flags, and we'll talk about what those are in a bit. Direct and cross referrals. So the BRE lead is actually the one that's responsible. Say a researcher goes out and there's a company that is ready to expand right now, this is a green, ready to expand right now, but just can't find an adequate site. And the researcher can then cue an action item to the BRE lead that says, company, this is the company, here's their link to their profile. This person needs to be followed up with immediately because they're thinking about leaving unless they get some help here finding that site. So that's the direct, sort of the direct follow-up. That BRE lead is the one, the buck stops there. There's nobody else to follow up. You have to follow up with that company. Now, it may be you go meet with the company and say, I'm trying to get the resources you need. I don't have them, and I'm not sure where to refer you, but I'm here to find out more about your issue, and I'm going to work to find out who can help, and I'm committed to that. So it's not like you can do everything. We know you can't, but certainly show that commitment and a timely feedback. And then in many cases, there'll be cross referrals. So we do need to get a lay of the land of who's in our region and who's doing what. And we talked a bit about that at break, about our network here. We've got a lot of resources, and just being aware of who's out there and what they do and what they can offer businesses so that you can make those referrals. And then participating in that BRE advisory group. And then the researchers themselves would be helping with the logistics, the day-to-day, the calling of the businesses, the setting up of the interviews, coordination, communications, press releases, supporting the steering committee, interviews with businesses in some cases, and data input. And then, as I mentioned, this idea of bumping up these action items so that BRE lead can go back to the company and follow up with them. Does that kind of make sense? It's going to look really different in every community, but the key pieces are the buck stops here. The BRE lead is you're responsible. And we do have some BRE leads out there that this is a new thing for them. So they've also said that if communities are interested and want to talk to me about my experience and how I'm learning as I go, that they're available to do that. And then in terms of timelines, I know some people have tighter timelines than this, but a typical BRE would be a 6-month activity, and it's broken down. I believe I gave you a little handout there as well. I know this is kind of small, and it actually just I'm not going to go through every single point here because I think you can review it, but the idea is you've got about 6 months. Month 1, you're assessing whether or not you're ready for this and getting those partners together. Then you're getting ready with respect to your communications plan. Who are you going to talk to? Who's going to talk to who? Are you hiring somebody? Hopefully you can get that done within a 2-month time frame. And then you're going out in months 3 and 4, so 6 weeks to 2 months to go out and interview businesses, depending on the number of businesses that you're interview, and we'll talk about how we set our target number. And then I ask for a month. I know there's some other situations where there has been a request for a quicker time frame, but I do need to know that way up in advance, about a month to do that data analysis and report out. And then month 6 plus, it goes. This is where you make sure that you get the findings out to the businesses. If you haven't followed up with businesses, make sure that you're doing that, and then doing that connection with the long-term planning and real tangible actions. Any questions about that? It's a project. So in terms of communications considerations, just some kind of high-level points, and then I invite you to go back to the manual that has some really good tools. Make sure you've got a clear plan prior to your project launch. So what you don't want is for your coordinator to be calling up businesses to set up appointments and them have no idea what you're doing or who you are. Right? So you want to identify who the key stakeholders are that you want to communicate the project to. What tools are you going to use? So press releases, e-newsletters, personal conversations, chamber newsletters, and then identify the goals. So make sure that they know who's involved. This is a collaborative effort, local government, chamber, CF, whoever else is involved. We are committed to the follow-through, and there's I think a pretty good draft letter out to businesses that sort of speaks to those things about who's involved and what our goals are, and that will depend on your community again. So you want to be really clear on what your goals are with this project, and they're communicated right at the very top of the project. And then you want base communication milestones. The launch, releasing the findings and the recommendations. How are you going to do that? What are your actions? And then this ongoing thing about making sure that you're doing something. So 3 months after you've put out here are the findings, 3 to 6 months later, you should be putting out another release or another communication piece around here's what we're actually doing, so that the folks in the community, the businesses in the community can see that there's actually some movement. And then you keep going with that, maybe every 6 months, to the point you get to 3 years later, and then you say, okay, everybody, we're ready to do it again. So defining your objectives. So this is what the steering committee really needs to focus on when they get together and they start planning. You need to look at what your purpose is, what is your geographic scope, what businesses you want to talk to, and what scope. So in terms of the purpose, you might want to just understand the business climate in general. You might want to just focus on the businesses that have the highest growth potential. You might want to be looking at sector or sectors with the most potential. Or you may want to just focus on major employers, those that are employing the big. Now, some of the research says don't bother with the mom and pops. So mom and pops being, I work out of my home and I don't have any employees. Well, the reality is in some communities, there's a lot of mom and pops. Look at the Slocan Valley. So what we're saying is we're not really following that philosophy because it is what it is where we live. So we believe that these communities these businesses have opportunities for growth as well, and that they're worth talking to. So any literature, I don't know if it speaks to that in any there, but you will read in some articles and publications don't focus on mom and pop, but we are including mom and pop. So identify that, but it depends on your community. You might be a larger community and you might want to focus on major employers or the retail sector downtown or whatever. So identify the geographic scope of your project. Do you want to just do the municipality? Do you want to do the municipality in the adjacent regional district or districts? Do you want to do a corridor where you do a cluster of communities in the regional districts in between? And then do you want to do a regional district or a full economic region? We're kind of we're moving towards that economic region, but we're really doing it in sort of almost like a cycle. So, and it's not top down, it's bottom up. So we're kind of getting to that. The interesting thing when I'm looking at the municipality and adjacent regional districts, so the Slocan Valley, Slocan City, Silverton, New Denver, and Regional District Area H. So they're doing a bit of a cluster. The boundary did Grand Forks, Christina Lake, Greenwood, Midway, Big White, and everywhere in between. So you can see we're starting to see some of these sort of clusters, right? And then identify the businesses in your community and the scope of the project. So really not too hard for the municipalities to have those business license databases. You can actually give me your Excel spreadsheet and I pass it over to Laith at ePulse and he can upload your entire database into the system and you don't have to add any contacts. Or you don't have any business licenses and you are sitting down and literally talking to one another about the businesses in your community and who you think should be involved. So I know that the Slocan Valley, that is exactly what they had to do. And then the other piece to be thinking about is identifying the target number of businesses. So we talked, Nelson did 200, Lower Columbia did around 147, 150, depending on the size of your community and the scope of your project. But from a research perspective, you're never going to get, well, I shouldn't say never, but it would be tremendously difficult to get a statistically significant sample in your community. You can go online and check out, there's charts that show you, but it would near be impossible. That's not what we're doing here, and that's okay. In academic research, lots of times we do papers and they are published and they're not statistically significant samples. So that's not our goal, but what our goal is from a research integrity perspective is when we present findings back out, it should not be clear that there's a particular business that said this or said that. And it's really difficult when you have a small sample to present data back out and not have people say, that's so-and-so. So we can't do that. So you should be targeting a minimum of 35 businesses. Of course, I love robust samples, so the more businesses the better, but certainly don't kill yourself. Try to get a good sample size that you can feel comfortable with, that you can identify folks on. And then in terms of your sampling, and I'm not going to go into detail. If folks want a little bit more on this, I can talk to you at break this afternoon, but in the back of your manual there is a sampling section, and it's actually a kind of a formula, and this is adapted from the Government of Ontario. If you are going for just your business climate in general, it's asking you to look at or name your key sectors, and then so small, medium, and large, and it's asking you to fill out a chart so that you've got kind of a bit of each. You don't have to go through the formula. You can be sitting down and saying, do we have some large businesses? Do we have some medium? Do we have some small? Do we have representation from retail? Agriculture, if you've got it. Manufacturing, professional services. So if you're doing a kind of a whole climate, you want a real mix of the businesses that you're speaking to. When we present your data back out to you, we'll be very clear on who you spoke to. So in the Lower Columbia sample, for example, they had, it was really, really strong on the service side. They had some big industry, but they were mainly service businesses that they'd spoken to. So when you're reading their report, it's skewed towards that. So there's not as many trades training needs as you might think, but it's because that's the sample. So think long and hard about your sample, because the story that's being told is based on that very thing. It's critical. So in terms of survey instruments, you have some choices. There's the long survey, which is 97 questions, I think. We have created, just here in the region, a short survey, which is just taking what we thought were the most important questions from the long survey. I think there's 30 questions in there. And then there are also sector-specific add-on surveys. I would like to recommend that you take the time to do the sector-specific add-on survey. It is specific to the sector. It's a 2-page, it's short, but it's really focused on the sector. And that type of data is going to help us as we move more regionally to better understand the sectors. So we already have, some manufacturing technology, but we're starting to get some agriculture subsets. So if we're looking at that, I think that's important for you to identify. We'll talk a bit, I think, when we go into the interview piece, but before you go into a company, do your homework. Who's the company? What's their information? Add their contact, add the company in the system. Add the NACE code, which is the North American Industry Classification System. This system is beautiful because it gives you the sort of the top level, and then it brings you down by NACE code. So you don't have to go look at the big NACE code book or online. It's really intuitive, and it'll kind of drill you down. So make sure you get all that information and then confirm the NACE code with the business when you meet them. But get that all populated and filled in advance. Figure out what you want to use. You might use long surveys on 50% of the businesses you use, but short on the other 50%. So decide before you go, based on that business and a variety of factors, what survey you want to use, and if there's a sector add-on that you want to use. That's kind of you really want to be prepared when you're walking in. And then in terms of data collection methods, we talked about this. You can do the business walk, you can do the structured interviews, self-administered online, self-administered online at a meeting, at a community meeting, or focus groups. So you can do one, all, multi-method, or focus on one. It's up to you, but you need to make the decision. And then in terms of the researchers, the BRE lead, of course, is going to be going out there. If you hire a researcher or researchers, they're helping you with this, and then maybe members of the steering committee. And then data input should be by the researcher that collected the data within 2 weeks of the interview. You're our new guinea pigs for BRE in our region, because with this new 6.0 system, I'm thinking we can be entering this data as you're sitting across from the business owner, which is going to save you, I think, buckets of time. Okay, in terms of data protection and confidentiality and consent, we do have a confidentiality agreement. It's in the back of your book. Every researcher that goes out and talks to a business needs to sign this confidentiality agreement. It basically says that they won't repeat any information gleaned from the interview without permission. Okay, so it protects, and it's critical too that businesses need to feel the data is protected, and if they don't, they're not going to tell you the truth, or they're not going to participate. And that's where I think following ethics, post-secondary ethics standards, I'm hoping is going to help alleviate that their data is safe and you will not breach a confidentiality agreement. There's a consent form, and again, it is following a post-secondary formula. So when you meet with them, you have to review the consent form and give them verbally these key points. And those points are: data will not be shared or used in a way that identifies any individual company. Who has access? Selkirk College RDI researchers who have all signed confidentiality agreements have access to the data. The local BRE lead and the executive director of the Economic Development Association of BC as part of the provincial license all have access to company level data. All have signed confidentiality agreements. Selkirk has a memorandum of understanding with the EDABC that says that Dale will not contact a company in our region without the consent of the BRE lead. So the main reason he has access is to look at integrity of the data. There's been like data being entered not appropriately, and it affects the whole provincial system. So that's where that piece is. Data is stored on a US server. That it's the Patriot Act, I'm sure, that folks are familiar with. You need to let them know that under the Patriot Act, the US government can access any information. It's important to note that we don't collect proprietary information as a part of this survey. But they need to know where the data is stored. It is not on a Canadian survey. And I don't know if there are plans or discussions on moving it to a Canadian survey, but so far there's been not really any pushback on the US server piece. And then the local BRE lead will contact businesses directly if it's been identified additional follow-up support may be required. And as it stands in the program right now, the business can't be contacted by anybody other than the BRE lead unless an action item is sent through the system that generates an email that the BRE lead generates to the company with an invitation to another person to attend a meeting or of that nature. So they're not getting unsolicited calls at this point from the BBA program, or, and we haven't worked out how, is this the best way to hold those referrals and protect? So we're still kind of figuring it out, but right now we're erring on the side of caution. It is through the BRE lead that's making the referral. In terms of R&D collaboration, so in your package you actually have a data sharing agreement that the communities would enter into with Selkirk College. We're bumping up our game a little bit. Selkirk is starting to enter activities related to research and development with companies. So as part of that, we're developing a series of new policies to be able to work with companies and new memorandums of understanding. So we're going a little heavier, a little bit more wording to protect relationships and information. So it's now going to be a research and development collaboration MOU, not to be afraid of. It's a good standard agreement. We'll enter into that with you so that we're very clear on about data sharing, but also who's doing what. So roles, timelines, deliverables for the community and the RDI. So we'll create a report for you. We will give you a spreadsheet with a summary of the coded data. We will provide one presentation to your community. The report will be in this format. So that kind of a thing to keep the integrity of both parties and to make sure that everybody from the very beginning is clear on who's doing what and hopefully by when, so that we're covered. Okay, I'm going to push you a little bit. Are you okay to push a little bit and just get through this interview protocol stuff? Okay, fabulous. So in terms of the interview protocol, now you're the interviewer and you're getting ready. I'm going to tool you up. So as I mentioned before, we talked about structured interviews. Before you go, I mentioned this, you're going to record all the information that you can get in advance. Get them all added into the system, everything in there that you know. Identify the most applicable survey tool based on the business. Prepare the interview package. So there's a checklist, I believe, in your manual too, of what you may want to bring. You want to bring the survey, a paper copy of the survey for the person so it's in front of them when they're being asked the questions. You want a resource handout, which I can show you an example of later. Copy of your confidentiality agreement. You're the researcher. Here's the copy of what you've signed and a copy of the consent form. You want to review your interview guidelines before, because there's some definitions that you want to just make sure that you're clear on before you go in. Review the survey and make note of questions that you know will not apply, so you don't ask and stumble, and then assign a participant number to the business through the coordinator, or just do what I said before you've got a cover page and you've got your hard copy. If you're doing it offline, we may all be doing it online from now on, but taking that cover copy and recording the participant number on the other one and then separating them. And then for the pre-interview, you want to make sure you arrive on time, break the ice, nice smile. You don't have to do the icebreaker exercise unless you want to. And you can throw, there's lots for you to pull out of your back pocket now after this morning. The BRE review the purpose of the business retention and expansion program so that they're clear on what the goals are and the scope. Provide a hard copy. Review the skip it rule. So the skip it rule is if you have any question that you don't want to answer for whatever reason, just say skip it and no questions asked. And then review research confidentiality form and the related research protocol that I spoke about, and then have them review and sign that form. Then the interview, ask every question exactly as it is worded, even if it means looking at it. And you can speak to the business owner before and explain why you're doing what you're doing, the way you're doing it, but that's a critical piece. Listen very carefully. Don't suggest answers. Don't commiserate about things that, oh, I think that too, and isn't that, we got to get that road paved or whatever it is. Don't do that. Ask for clarification if you don't understand. There's lots of areas to write notes, and I recommend the more notes you take, the better. We do qualitative coding, so it will help us. It's rich data for us, so if something doesn't fit or you're not sure, use the notes section. Don't take offense, and don't promise any solutions. I know it's hard, sometimes you want to solve problems, but don't do that. In terms of recording, have a spare pen. Take good notes at the end of each section, write clearly, and paraphrase the result of the discussion. Same is true on the online interface.
So if you take a note and you're going to give that as a response from them, should you clarify that note each time you talk to them then? Or?
So repeat back? Yes.
Yeah.
So
if you take a note.
Yeah, just say, so I've heard that you're finding it's a big challenge of da 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 da. I put that in the notes section so that we're able to capture that. And then after the interview, review survey responses to make sure it's complete and clear. So just review what you've been able to capture. If there might be some other things you just couldn't capture while you were there, that's probably going to be the case. Take some time right after the interview to add those extra notes in there, and even your observations, that's okay to do. The more information we have from a qualitative perspective, the more we can piece together the data and give you a good product. That's not saying add your commentary. I'm saying, add what you heard or what you need to include. Identify the red flag but also green flag issues. So something that's urgent and you need assistance, I would get into the habit of this, generate that action item right there, right away. This business is having a serious issue, and pop it up to that BRE lead and get that responded to. I think the best practice example that said that it was within 1 week that they were closing those, that it was very quick. Now I said, wow, that sounds really impressive. Like, how did you manage that? And they said, well, we have a full-time BRE coordinator, and that's really all that they do. And I said, okay. So the BRE lead to follow up with the businesses within a 2 week and make sure that you close that loop within the system so we can start tracking. Talked about recording the participant number and entering the data and removing the cover page, covered that, and then making sure that the surveys are in a different location from the cover page. And then what are red flags and green flags? And I think that takes us right to lunch. Red flags is, business is going to close, it's going to leave, it's going to relocate, this is serious. That's a red flag. You need to alert that right away. Again, don't make any promises or expectations, but that needs to be acted upon. We've seen some green flags, which I was going through. I'm yet to actually get to one of those Economic Development Association of Canada. I'm not sure, Kevin, have you ever been to one of those, the national associations? And I was just going through their website and looking, they had some BRE materials, and now they're talking too about green flags. So what we've learned so far in the communities that we've worked with, there were more green flags than red. There were opportunities. So I'm talking about green flags more than I'm talking about red flags now. And that's, you're ready to expand, but you've got some barriers that could help you. Also, new ownership is pending, but there's no succession plan. You can help with that. And then employee recruitment and challenges of skills that are needed. So there's some opportunities that maybe even be a little bit longer term and might involve other players like the colleges or skills centers or community futures. But there are some opportunities here that you can follow up with the business in a positive way to help that expansion. Because it is about business expansion and retention, isn't it? Great. So in terms of data analysis, this is one slide, data analysis and reporting. We'll take care of it for you. That's all you need to know. Just kidding. Let us know when your data's in there and it's complete. We'll review it, and if we see some inconsistencies, we'll follow up with you, which we have done with partners. We have access to the system, as I mentioned, and we liaise with your BRE lead for follow-up questions as we need, which we do. Allow 4 weeks for the analysis and reporting. We've started to develop lead sheets for communities, and that is, hey, here's a series of questions, and here are some businesses that you need to talk to if you have not talked to them yet. And we found with some of our community partners to date, there's some opportunities there that they haven't acted on. So we're looking, it's sort of we're just piloting that, but this idea of lead sheets, if you haven't done the follow-up or noted that this is opportunity. The draft report will come to you, and we'll try to get that turned around for you in about a week, tweaking that. Maximum of 1 community presentation of BRE findings by a member of the BRE team. I say this because I went on a 3-night roadshow, 3 or 4 night roadshow in the Lower Columbia, and I was just about back to back. So you get one, if you want, myself or our economic lead will come to your community, unless that becomes just so big we can't anymore, but I'll make that offer to you now. Communities are to engage in a planning session to link to that economic development plan and really start to focus on the short and long term. Now, when you do your budget, you might want to put in there a facilitator or identify somebody that can help you through that process so that you can really make sure that you've tied that piece of the puzzle together. And it's great, even in Lower Columbia, when I went to present to the Lower Columbia Initiatives Board, they said, wow, that's really interesting because we were actually going to do that. And that's not really what we're hearing from this. That would have kind of been, we should actually be doing this. So they were really happy to see that they were at that point. Okay, so an important part of business retention and expansion, or well, maybe the most important part, is actually doing something with the findings that you generate from your survey. So you've done some good work building relationships. You've got a really nice report and some recommendations, and you've linked that back hopefully to your steering committee. But now what? How do you really mobilize these findings? How do you mobilize research into action? So what I've done is just sort of give you a snapshot about you've updated your plan and now you're looking at actions that you'd like to undertake. What I recommend is envisioning actions in terms of short-term and longer-term. Short-term are really good ones to do because short-term actions show that you've got some results right off the hopper. They're low-hanging fruit, things that you might be able to do easily or that people are already starting to work on. And it really shows you've got some action going. Longer term are bigger issues, maybe that people haven't thought about yet in the community, and it might take more energy and more partnerships, and you might need more time to form the partnerships or get additional funding and able to be able to do that. So the brief summary here is short term, it's short term, it's low-hanging fruit, something easy to do, and you're able to communicate back out. Longer term could be 1 to 2 years, takes more human and financial efforts, and you really want to make sure that it's connected to that strategy you've worked so hard on. Is it advancing the game or is it completely off in left field? You want the strategy to connect with the action. And then it can also connect with other community planning processes. For example, your official community plan or your integrated community sustainability plan. So looking at how that might happen. Now I thought I'd share with you the communities that undertook, some of the communities that already undertook the BRIE and what came out of their findings and where they're at right now. So they've been presented with some key themes and recommendations, and now they're bringing it back to their steering committee or economic development group to start figuring out how that's going to refresh or create a plan, the economic development plan in the community. So the Lower Columbia, which is Trail, Montrose, Fruitvale, Warfield, and Rossland, were part of this partnership. And what they found was site selection was a big issue. There were a number of businesses that said, we want to expand, but we can't find an adequate site. And this was a key theme that came up in the data. So what was recommended to them is they actually move forward and go out to those businesses, 12 businesses, I can't remember, that said, hey, yeah, we're ready to go, we're ready to expand, can't find a site, and find out what the nature of the problem is. Maybe it's just a lack of information where the site might be. Maybe it's a zoning issue. But that BRIE lead person needs to go out and talk to those companies and find out if they can help and how they can help. The other piece is there was bubbling up of some concerns over the development approval process. Now, when I went to present this back to the board, they said, well, that may be a misperception. We actually think we have a pretty good development approval process. And we think that businesses are just saying the fact that we have a development approval process is the problem. So the recommendation is to actually go back to the businesses that specifically mention that and find out more about the nature of the problem. I know in Vernon, when they did their business retention and expansion, they found development approval process to be cumbersome based on the perspective of businesses, and they've since revitalized their approval process and made it much more easy and user-friendly. So that's one that may pop up. The other, not uncommon with the BRIEs that we've seen so far, is supply sourcing and buying local. So what's happening in the classic economic development, what you want is money circulating in your region, and you want export opportunities. So you can be grabbing that money back into your region, and you don't want to be losing. What's happening is companies are, for a number of factors, sourcing their supplies elsewhere and not taking advantage of export markets in the way that they could possibly be doing that. Could be for a variety of reasons, and we've asked them why. And it is generally too expensive, not available in the region, but in some instances it could be just a matter of they don't know that those supplies actually exist within the region. So being able to provide that information to connect purchasers with local suppliers, but also to communicate back to suppliers in the region what businesses are looking for that they can't seem to find. So it's kind of a communication piece. There's also other things that you can do around export opportunities. There's provincial government resources that you can plug into, and I know that for the Vernon example, they did that very thing. They really looked at export, helping identify export markets, helping groups, companies access those markets. And then there's the trade representatives that we can tap into as well. Training, training, training. When does training not come up? There's always an issue with training. It's very, very difficult to accommodate the diverse, unique training needs that we have within the region. Different communities have different training needs too, based on what types of workers that they're attracting, are looking to attract, and who they're trying to attract that they're having really quite a bit of trouble attracting. So we're identifying those areas and we're communicating this information back to the colleges, the skills centers, the community futures, and other training groups to say, how can we put our heads together to look at new ways to deliver training? And maybe some of those ways are online. We are seeing that there are a fair number of companies that are sending their employees out of the region to access training. So we're really looking at what are the opportunities here at the two colleges, but all of the other groups that are delivering training that we can start to look at addressing. Recruitment and promotion. So in this particular area, it was mechanics and sales and service personnel. You'll see different things bubbling up in different communities. And what the businesses are saying is we need help attracting workers. So what the Lower Columbia is doing, and I know a number of communities are doing, and folks are even starting to do it on a regional level, is creating recruitment packages that can be then handed over to companies that they can use to attract those workers. The interesting thing we learned from Lower Columbia, for example, was that when companies were looking to recruit employees, they were really looking in their own backyard and still using a lot of word of mouth. So it's tooling them up that, hey, in the Lower Columbia, you could be marketing to people in Nelson or up the valley or Roslyn. There's a whole corridor there that you could be accessing, and even beyond, other areas within the region, as well as external to the region. We know we have great lifestyle assets, so how do we start working together to support these companies, because they are sort of on their own and really struggling with certain pocket areas. The other piece I don't think is a surprise is this whole business and succession planning. Nobody seems to have an up-to-date business plan. And succession planning, people are looking to exit, but haven't even thought about what it takes to get a succession plan in place. So I know the community futures groups have done work around succession planning workshops and are looking to potentially roll out more opportunities there. So you're welcome to talk to Sean from Community Futures East Kootenay about that. He can give you an update, I'm sure, not to put you on the spot. These are just a few things that bubbled up. They'll be taking some of these and looking to update their plan. The manufacturing and technology BRE recommendations, there were some similar themes. These are pretty general. They've been handed back to the innovation councils, who are now working on some strategic planning around it. But I think what the innovation councils are realizing is, hey, this is way bigger than any one organization can tackle. So it's really the start of the conversation about what some of these opportunities and challenges are. Not surprising, again, the training piece. Regional promotion, there was some feedback that not only should we be promoting our region externally, but also internally. There's a real disconnect on knowing what others are doing within the region, even within a sector. So there's opportunity to build the sectors. Facilitating planned business expansion. Obviously, the telecommunications infrastructure continues to be an issue that is a regional level issue that is being chipped away at. Boosting R&D, you know we don't have a university here in this region, and the colleges are now able to start accessing federal funding to help with R&D with companies. So there's a new role, I think, for our colleges in the region to play around this, but it's still very new, and our companies are at a bit of a disadvantage not to be able to walk over to the university down the street and say, I need a physicist, or I need a chemist, or I need a whatever it might be. Readying companies for export and increasing out of sales, again, that whole exporting out piece. The skilled employees, we know we've got a workforce, You know, it is upon us. A number of the companies have said, yes, we could hire someone now, but we can't find that person. So if we can continue to identify what those pocket areas are that are needed now and tomorrow, we can be a little bit more strategic in what we're doing in terms of training our existing workforce and what we're going out there to try to attract into our area. Upgrading on business energy efficiency. A lot of companies didn't know about rebates that were available through BC Hydro and other energy groups. So that's an information piece that I think we should be schooling ourselves up on and sharing back out. And then just the idea of fostering greater networking and collaboration, that sense of, I know there are others out there that I could be collaborating with, maybe joint marketing with, but I don't know who they are. So again, that little bit of disjoint. Vernon's a little bit further along, but I thought I'd share their story. Kevin Poole's done a wonderful job out of Vernon on their business retention and expansion. It's been running for a few years. And what they came up with was reviewing their government approval processes. And as I mentioned, they actually took some significant action in that area. Developing the labor force recruitment packages. So they're already down the road, and Lower Columbia is also moving forward with that. Assisting those companies in recruiting. They've seen some key areas that need to be addressed. I'm not sure if they've moved on this one, being consider developing an HR website for use by companies seeking employees. I don't know if that got any traction. They've completed a land and facility inventory, and Kevin actually presented at the last economic conference. So you know, we also in our region have a employment lands inventory. It's an online geospatial database mapping system. It's in beta form. So if you're interested in taking a cruise around that system, we have almost all of the geospatial data we need. We're waiting on a few more communities, but we have a pretty robust interface there that you can actually look at the inventory, but you can start to search the inventory, which is starting to move us into that site selection piece. So when we're finding that companies, and we have found, can't find adequate sites for their expansion for whatever reason, our employment lands inventory is a really good resource to start. What do we have out there anyway? And using some criteria to search down. They want to do some BRE program for other sectors, and I think they have done. They've continued their efforts. And they're looking to introduce their companies, and they have, to the BC Trade and Investment reps in the US, Asia, and Europe. And they've created a sector alliance for manufacturing. So they're plugging along, and they really do embrace it as an ongoing initiative. Nelson did business retention expansion 3 years ago now. They've embedded it into their economic development plan with the Nelson and Area Economic Development Partnership, and they're tracking metrics. So what they knew right away, and a lot of these are really kind of shorter term, but they did an e-business seminar, they developed a high-tech lure package, they partnered with Selkirk College to do some retail management training that was in need, service provider trade fair and reverse trade fair, they did a buy local program. They did some improvements to the city with respect to communicating and posting information. I don't know if you know, but since then, Nelson has a new website, and they've got a new, in the Nelson Star, they have a business section, and they've really stepped up their game with respect to communicating out to businesses. They did a bankers forum. There was some concerns around lending, so they just wanted to elevate the information there. And of course, some signage changes for parking. I don't know where they're at with the dogs in the downtown. I'm not sure, that's contentious, but I know that's been in the paper, so I'm sure they're discussing. These ones are coming from the, I believe, the BR&E International, Business Retention and Expansion International. It's probably a good time to say that there's more robust training that you can access. I know there's the, help me out, Kevin, here, the Economic Development International Economic Development Council that offers a 2-day, more robust training session out of Vancouver in partnership with the EDABC, which is our provincial association. And there's also Business Retention and Expansion International, and I think they do a 3-day. And they do that, they have a conference every year. So if you're looking for more and I've whet your appetite, there's more for you to get into. This is a summary just of some communities in Ontario and what they've done. One example is out of Prescott Russell, where I actually used to teach out of that district. They decided that they really needed a manufacturers network to start to improve communication in that sector. And what has resulted is a greater dialogue between the manufacturers in that area, and import replacement opportunities were identified and are actually being actualized. In terms of Rainy River, which is close to where I did my undergrad in Thunder Bay at Lakehead. Rainy River is kind of down the road. They partnered with the First Nations for broadband infrastructure funding, and they were successful at getting almost $1 million. Broadband is now being provided in the district, and obviously they've got an improved business environment. In terms of Parry Sound, customer service training was noted, as well as input to signage bylaws and development approval process. They did move forward on that, and as a result, they do have better trained employees, more effective signage, and they've revamped that whole approval process piece. And then finally, I'm not sure, I didn't put what community this one's from, I'm trying to remember, but they developed a Street Smart program, a strategic plan for their downtown development, and a waterfront feasibility plan. And as a result, their business association is more actively involved in downtown development. And downtown businesses, as a result, are starting to invest more money in their storefront upgrades. So at the time of this, there were 15 storefront projects to date. So lessons learned from so far from the BRE pilot. This is kind of our conclusion, but we're not done yet. Businesses do want to talk. It's been more about green flags than it has about red, so that was a very pleasant surprise. I'd mentioned already, overestimate the amount of time this is going to take per business. We found that the findings have been very useful to economic development plans and really starting to get the light bulb on about some concrete actions that communities can take, and that context matters. So we found, depending on the community that we've worked with, they need more or less support, and context really does matter in terms of implementing a BRE. Critical ingredients to success, I think we've spoken sort of around this already today, but you need the local leadership. You must have the partnerships. Make sure you're ready, so you're set up for success. You need champions. You need some short-term wins right off the hopper, and you need commitment over the long term. So you really need to be in it to win it over the long term. So that concludes this portion of our training session today. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you found it very useful.